When I first moved to this quiet little town, it felt like I'd stepped back in time. The people were friendly, and everything moved at a slower pace compared to the hustle and bustle of the city I had just left. I bought myself a modest house, got a job nearby, and before long, I had fully adapted to this rural way of life. The neighborhood was an interesting mix of lifelong locals and people like me, looking for a fresh start. Every person had their own story, and soon enough, I became part of the community, participating in local events and making friends. One person who stood out right away was Mr. Henderson. He owned a huge farm just down the road, but his daughters had moved away, and with his age catching up to him, he eventually sold the land and retired to the south. After he left, his farm sat there empty, giving the place an eerie stillness that got the town talking. Everyone was curious about who would move in next. It didn't take long before the rumors started. New neighbors were coming, rich folks from up north. When the new family arrived, they purchased the entire estate: the farmhouse, the barns, outbuildings, and a vast 212 acres of prime farmland. The place had thrived under Mr. Henderson, but after his daughters moved on, the old man decided to sell despite their objections. They had worried about his health, but Henderson was fine, just set on living out his remaining years somewhere warmer. One day, while driving down a country road in the middle of a cold, rainy evening, I came across one of Henderson's daughters in a sleek Cadillac. Steam was pouring out from under the hood, and she looked like she was having a tough time. I pulled over to offer help, but instead of being grateful, she panicked and refused to even crack her window. Standing there in the freezing rain, I figured I'd better get help, so I drove to the top of Henderson Hill, the only place you could get a phone signal, and called Wendell from the local sheriff's department. "Why didn't you just help her out, man?" Wendell asked when he picked up. "I tried," I said, a little defensive. "She wouldn't open the door." Wendell sighed. "Well, get your butt out there and do something. She's probably scared stiff in this weather." I sighed too, but agreed. After all, what choice did I have? Wendell sweetened the deal by tempting me with some leftover barbecue from the station, so I threw on my raincoat and trudged back to help. Wendell met me there, and together, we convinced her to let us check under the hood. Turns out, the radiator hose had split. I recommended she call AAA and offered to tow the car to my lot for safekeeping. By then, she had calmed down and thanked me profusely. Her name was Ashley Hatfield, and as it turned out, she and her husband had just bought Mr. Henderson's old place. I took her home, dropped off the car, and made sure she had power before heading back to my place, exhausted from the long day. That's how I first crossed paths with the Hatfields. Little did I know then how much our lives would intertwine. The next day, the sun was shining, and the weather had taken a complete 180 from the cold rain the night before. I had plenty of time on my hands, so I got to work fixing Ashley's car. By lunchtime, it was good as new, just a busted radiator hose, nothing major. A few hours later, a well-dressed man in his 40s came into my shop. "Hi, I'm Ben Hatfield. I'm here to arrange a tow for my wife's car," he said, looking a bit out of place in his crisp suit. Charlie, my assistant, pointed to me with a grin. "You're already looking at the guy who fixed it." I couldn't help but laugh. "Will McCoy," I introduced myself. "I'm the one who worked on it. No need to tow it anymore, it's all fixed up. Just have Ashley come by before 6, and she can drive it home." Ben looked surprised. "How much do I owe you?" $40, I replied, but before he could pull out his wallet, I added, "For the parts, not the labor." He looked confused. "You're not charging me for the work?" I shook my head. "Nope. Around here, we don't charge neighbors for favors like that. If it was a rental or something official, sure, but this? Just being neighborly." Ben seemed to appreciate it, though I could tell the concept of doing something for free was foreign to him. Later that afternoon, he brought Ashley back, and she thanked me again, this time with her husband by her side. I could tell they were wealthier than most people around here. She looked younger than him, strikingly attractive, and very polished, someone who probably wasn't used to small-town life. But she was warm and friendly enough, and by the end of our conversation, she insisted I call her by her first name. "We're neighbors now," she said, offering her hand. As time passed, our lives continued to intersect. Ashley and Ben settled into their new place, and the Hatfields became more involved in the community. Meanwhile, my own life was taking a bit of a turn. My wife, Sarah, had started to act strange, materialistic, constantly wanting more. She began complaining about her car, a Chevrolet Impala we'd bought only 2 years ago. "This thing's practically falling apart." "I need a new car," she snapped one evening. "You don't need a new car. You just want one," I shot back, tired of the same argument. "We can't keep up with the Hatfields, Sarah. Ben's a lawyer, for crying out loud. Besides, your car is fine." That was when I started to realize how far apart we were drifting. She seemed to care more about keeping up with our new wealthy neighbors than about the life we had built. And while she was drowning in credit card debt and trying to maintain appearances, I was starting to see that something was deeply wrong between us. The tension only grew as time went on. We had once talked about starting a family, but now that idea was met with cold silence. Every time I brought it up, Sarah would shut down. I was frustrated, confused, and starting to feel like I didn't know my wife anymore. One evening, after another argument about money and priorities, I made a decision. I went into our bedroom, pulled out all her clothes, and started packing them into suitcases. When she got home, she just stood there, shocked. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not living like this anymore, Sarah," I said, not even looking up from the suitcase. "You need to go. I called your mom, and she's agreed to let you stay with her for a couple of weeks. In that time, we'll find you a place. I'll pay the deposit and the first 2 months' rent, but after that, you're on your own." She didn't take it well. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, begging me to reconsider. I watched her cry, feeling numb. After a while, I helped her up, wiped her face with a cool cloth, and told her to clean up. We needed to talk like adults. When we sat down in the kitchen, she finally opened up. She admitted she was terrified of having kids. Her parents had split when she was 12, and it had scarred her. She was afraid she'd end up just like her mom, overwhelmed and alone, trying to raise a family. I took her hand and promised her that wouldn't happen. "We're not talking about having a whole house full of kids. Just one, Sarah. If we decide to have another, it'll be a few years down the road. But I'll never leave you, no matter what." For a few weeks, things seemed to get better. Sarah stopped her reckless spending and even opened up a savings account. It felt like maybe, just maybe, we could get back to where we once were. But little did I know, things were far from fixed. For a while, things really did seem to improve. Sarah was more relaxed, and we got back into a rhythm that felt almost like the early days of our marriage. She even surprised me one day, showing me the balance in her new savings account. It wasn't much, but it was a start. 3 months passed, and one afternoon, she dropped a bombshell on me in the kitchen. "I've got a surprise for you," she said, grinning from ear to ear. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? What's that?" "I've been saving for something." "Not what you think, though," she said, handing me a small box. I opened it to find a set of paint samples. "We need to start picking colors." "Colors? For what?" "For the nursery," she said, smiling that knowing smile women get when they know they've just turned your world upside down. "I'm pregnant." I stood there, dumbfounded. "Wait. What?" "We're going to have a baby. A boy, actually. The doctor said I'm about 7 months along, so you'd better get started on that nursery," she laughed. "I've already stopped taking my birth control. I wanted it to be a surprise." It hit me like a ton of bricks. She had been keeping this secret for months, all while I was clueless, worrying about money and her strange behavior. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. As the reality set in, the tears came anyway, much to her surprise. "You're happy, right?" she asked, a little worried. "Happy?" I could barely get the words out. "This is the best news I've ever heard." I pulled her into a hug, covering her with kisses, and promised her I would take care of everything. The nursery, the house, her, whatever she needed, I would be there. The next few months were a whirlwind. We got the nursery set up, and Sarah's mom moved in with us to help out during the final weeks of the pregnancy. Things were looking up, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were finally on the same page again. We were about to start a family, and I couldn't have been more excited. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Sarah's pregnancy was tough. She ended up on bed rest for the last month, which meant I had to juggle work and taking care of her. Her mom helped a lot, and although things were stressful, we managed to get through it. After 17 hours of labor, She ended up having a C-section. We welcomed William Bryan McCoy into the world, a healthy, almost 9-pound baby boy with a full head of black hair, just like me. I remember the moment I held him in my arms for the first time. It was life-changing. Becoming a father was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The weight of responsibility hit me, but so did a sense of overwhelming love. Everything in my life changed in that moment. It was no longer just about me or Sarah. It was about this little person who now depended on us for everything. Sarah, though, didn't take to motherhood quite like I expected. She loved Billy, but it became clear pretty quickly that she wasn't as hands-on as I had imagined she would be. As soon as I got home from work, she would hand him off to me, calling it her baby recovery time. She needed a break, she said, and while I didn't mind, it felt like she was trying to distance herself from the whole experience. Billy and I bonded quickly. He never cried when I was holding him, and we'd spend hours together talking, or at least I'd do the talking while he'd stare up at me with those wide baby eyes. But this bothered Sarah. She'd get irritated whenever I'd come home to find him fussing in her arms, only for him to calm down as soon as I took over. I started noticing other things, too. Sarah was distant, even more so than before. She'd leave the house more often, sometimes for hours at a time, claiming she needed me time to cope with the stress of being a mom. I tried to be understanding, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was around this time that our neighbors, the Hatfields, came back into the picture. Ben and Ashley had become good friends of ours over the past year. They had a huge place, and Ashley had taken to gardening with an enthusiasm that surprised me. She even wanted to rent a tractor from me one day for her garden. "I'm not renting you a tractor, Ashley," I said, half joking. "Why not?" she asked, genuinely confused. "Because you don't know how to use one. And I don't want you getting hurt and me having that on my conscience," I said with a laugh. "Besides, you've got that Yanmar Mr. Henderson left behind. It's perfect for your garden." She frowned. "Yeah, except it won't start." "Well, there's your problem. The battery's probably dead. Tell you what, tomorrow's Saturday. I'll swing by and take a look. But no driving it until I say it's safe." She smiled, clearly relieved. "You're a lifesaver, Will. But don't let me pull you away from your family." "They'll be with me," I assured her. The next day, I showed up with Billy in tow. As soon as we got there, Ashley swooped in to hold him, cooing over him like he was her own. Meanwhile, I got to work charging the tractor battery while Ben and I scoped out a spot for the garden. That was the beginning of what would become a much deeper bond between our families. But even as I spent more time with the Hatfields, something was festering at home, something I couldn't quite put my finger on yet. The more time I spent with the Hatfields, the more I noticed how close our families were becoming. Ashley and Ben treated Billy like he was part of their own family, and I was grateful for that. Ben was a great guy, and Ashley was kind, always offering to help out whenever she could. But at home, things were unraveling faster than I could keep up with. One Saturday, after I helped Ashley fix the tractor, she and Sarah had a long chat over lunch. Sarah was polite, but I could tell something was bothering her. As we drove home that afternoon, she finally said, "Ashley's house is beautiful. It's nothing like Mr. Henderson's old place. They've really done well for themselves." "Yeah, good for them," I replied, thinking nothing of it. But Sarah wasn't done. "Did you know they have a trust fund?" Ashley mentioned it today. "They also still own a house up north that she inherited from her grandmother. Must be nice to have that kind of security." I sighed, realizing where this conversation was headed. "It's their life, Sarah. Good for them if they've got money. But we're doing just fine." She didn't say anything, but I could see her wheels turning. That night, I caught her on her phone, looking up the value of some paintings she had seen at Ashley's place. She seemed almost obsessed with it, as if trying to measure herself against the Hatfields. As time went on, Sarah became more and more distant. She even went back to work, though we didn't really need the extra money. It was like she couldn't stand being at home all day. At first, I thought it was just cabin fever. Being cooped up with a baby can drive anyone crazy. But then it started feeling like she just didn't want to be around us at all. Meanwhile, my bond with Ben and Ashley grew stronger. Ben and I became great friends, and we'd often spend time together outside of work. One day, Ashley called me, asking if I could help with a small garden project at their place. I agreed and took Billy along with me again. Sarah, on the other hand, barely showed any interest in what we were doing. I started noticing that whenever we visited, Ashley spent just as much time with Billy as she did tending to her garden. She loved holding him, playing with him, and would often talk about how she and Ben had wanted kids but never had any. One afternoon, as Billy giggled in her arms, she confided in me. "You know, Will, we tried for a long time to have children. When it didn't happen, we got tested. Turns out, Ben is infertile. It was something from his younger years, a health issue." She looked down at Billy and smiled sadly. "We talked about adoption, but Ben wasn't comfortable with it, so we just let it go." She glanced at me, then back to Billy. "Sometimes, when I hold him, I wonder what it would have been like to be a mother. But then he spits up or needs a diaper change, and I hand him right back to you," she laughed, though there was a touch of sadness in her voice. I didn't know what to say. I admired how open she was, and I felt for her. But the more time I spent at their house, the more I realized how deep the cracks in my own marriage were growing. Sarah rarely came along anymore, and when she did, she was distant, more focused on the material things Ashley had than on our family. I was starting to feel alone in my own house. We had stopped talking about having more kids, and it seemed like every conversation between us ended in some kind of argument. I was working long hours, and when I came home, all Sarah wanted to talk about was upgrading her car or buying a bigger house. She had her eyes set on keeping up with the Hatfields in every way possible, but the truth was, I didn't care about any of that. I just wanted my wife back. One evening, after yet another fight about money, I told her flat out, "I'm not buying you a new car. If you want it so badly, you can get it yourself, but my name's not going on any paperwork." Her credit was terrible, and she knew it. Years ago, when we were dating, I had helped her pay off some of her debt, but I had refused to touch her credit card bills. I didn't believe in living beyond our means, and credit cards were a trap I had always avoided. I even made her sign a prenuptial agreement before we got married to protect my house and business. Things had gone downhill fast after that. Sarah spent more time at work, and less time with me and Billy. She was constantly out late, claiming she had meetings or events to attend, and while I tried to believe her, something about it didn't sit right with me. Around the same time, Ben came to me with a favor. "Will, my partners and I are hosting a big meeting at the house, and I want to throw a proper Southern barbecue. You and Sarah are the best cooks I know. Would you be willing to cater it? I'll pay you for your time." I hadn't cooked professionally in years, but I couldn't say no to Ben. He had become my closest friend, and I missed the days when Sarah and I would host events together. I agreed to help, hoping it might rekindle something between us. Sarah, however, didn't share my enthusiasm. "I can't. We've already got an event booked that weekend," she said coldly when I brought it up. Her words hit me hard. "They're our friends, Sarah. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't even have this business. I don't care about the money. This is personal. You need to be there." But she wasn't, and for the first time in our marriage, I realized just how far apart we had drifted. I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. It didn't take long for things to hit rock bottom. The weekend of Ben's barbecue rolled around, and just like she'd said, Sarah had an event booked. I was frustrated but tried to stay calm. "Just check in at your event, make sure everything's running smoothly, and come back to help. It's Ben's birthday, and this is important," I urged, hoping to get through to her. But she didn't budge. She left early that day, saying she'd be back later. I wasn't holding my breath. I set everything up myself, making sure the barbecue was perfect for Ben and his guests. As the day wore on, I realized Sarah wasn't coming. I called her, but she didn't pick up. Frustrated, I went about my work, determined not to let her absence ruin the event. Around dusk, Ben's party was in full swing. People were laughing, eating, and enjoying the warm evening. I had just finished checking the food when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah, stuck at work. "Be home in an hour, I sighed, shaking my head. The party would be over by then. But I had one more job to do before calling it a night. We were running low on ice, and I had to grab some from my house. My truck was locked, so Ben tossed me his keys, telling me to take his car. It wasn't far, just a quick drive through the woods, and I figured I'd be back in no time. But as I got close to the house, something stopped me in my tracks. Through the sliding glass door, I could see two people inside, tangled up on the couch. At first, I thought maybe it was one of the neighborhood kids sneaking in, but then I froze. I recognized them. It was Sarah, and one of Ben's younger employees. My mind went blank. For a moment, I couldn't move. My first instinct was to storm in there and tear the place apart. But then Ben's words from years ago echoed in my head. Asterisk, never act in the heat of the moment when it comes to infidelity. It'll only hurt you later in court, asterisk. I stood there, seething with anger, gripping the phone in my hand. Without thinking, I snapped a few photos through the blinds. I needed proof. The rage boiled inside me, but I knew better than to confront them right then. Instead, I called Ben. "Hey, buddy, what's taking so long?" "Should I send Angie to help?" he asked, completely unaware of what I had just witnessed. "No, don't send her," I replied, my voice tight. "But I do need Angie. For something else. Can you bring her here?" "No." Ben didn't ask questions, just said he'd be there soon. 20 minutes later, Angie, Ben, and two of their friends showed up at my house. Angie came to me first, concern etched on her face. "Will, what's going on?" I showed her the photos. "I need a witness." "And a divorce lawyer," I said, barely holding it together. Her eyes went wide with shock. "Stay calm. We're going to handle this the right way." One of the women with them stepped forward. "I'm Julie," she said gently, "and I'm a divorce lawyer. I can help you, Will. But you need to stay level-headed. This is going to be tough, but trust me, you'll come out stronger on the other side." I nodded, too angry to speak. Angie held my hand as we all walked up to the house together. Ben knocked on the door, loudly enough to make sure they heard. "Sarah, it's Ben. Will sent us for ice. We're all out." I could hear the frantic scrambling from inside as Sarah and her lover rushed to gather their clothes. The door finally opened, and there stood Sarah, flushed and disheveled, trying to act like nothing was wrong. Her lover had run out to the deck, thinking he could hide in the dark. Ben's face was a mixture of pity and anger as he looked from Sarah to the deck. He spotted the guy, who was holding his pants, shoes, and everything else in his hands like a deer caught in headlights. Julie raised her phone, calmly snapping pictures of the scene. Sarah stood there, frozen, unable to speak. Finally, Ben spoke up. "Get out," he said quietly but firmly. "Both of you." "No." Sarah didn't argue. She grabbed her things and ran out of the house, tears streaming down her face. The other guy, still in shock, followed right behind her, his head hanging low. Once they were gone, Angie and Ben sat with me in the living room. I was numb, staring at the door, trying to process what had just happened. Julie handed me her card. "We'll file first thing Monday morning," she said softly. "But for now, just breathe. You're going to get through this." I barely slept that night, the betrayal weighing heavily on my mind. The next morning, Angie showed up bright and early with Billy, who was blissfully unaware of the chaos that had just unfolded. She had taken him for the night, knowing I wasn't in any shape to care for him. As I held my son, I realized that whatever happened next, I had to put him first. Sarah had shattered our family, but I wasn't going to let her take Billy from me. I would fight for him, whatever it took. Monday morning came, and I found myself sitting in Julie's office, feeling like I was floating through a fog. She laid out the options, calmly explaining the divorce process and what I could expect. It all felt so surreal. The woman I had built my life with had been unfaithful, and now I was staring down the barrel of a legal battle I never thought I'd face. "Will, the most important thing right now is to stay focused on Billy," Julie said, bringing me back to the present. "You'll likely get custody, given the circumstances, but we'll need to make sure everything is airtight. Keep a clear head, and don't engage with Sarah." "Let me handle everything." I nodded, grateful that she was there to help. But no amount of legal advice could dull the sting of betrayal. The days that followed were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. I moved out of the house temporarily, staying with Ben and Angie until I could figure things out. Meanwhile, Sarah tried to reach out, first with angry texts, then with tearful apologies. I didn't respond. By the end of the week, Julie had filed the paperwork, and I had been granted temporary custody of Billy. Sarah was allowed visitation, but only under strict conditions: no men around our son, and no overnight stays. She had moved in with her lover, who had since lost his job due to the scandal. That brought me a little satisfaction, but not much. At that point, all I cared about was protecting Billy from the chaos. Angie and Ben were my lifeline. They helped me navigate everything, from the emotional toll to the logistics of handling the business while I was caught up in the legal fight. Angie took care of Billy most days while I worked, and Ben, being a former divorce attorney, gave me sound advice on how to manage my emotions and keep the upper hand. As the weeks passed, Sarah's calls became more desperate. She begged for another chance, but I couldn't trust her anymore. I had seen enough. I stuck to my plan: no confrontation, no outbursts. Just quiet, steady resolve. The divorce dragged on for months, but eventually we reached a settlement. Sarah got the party planning business, which was already starting to falter without my help. In return, I kept the house, my rental business, and most importantly, full custody of Billy. The court granted her visitation rights, but only under strict conditions. It was the best outcome I could have hoped for. As the dust settled, I realized just how much my life had changed. The business grew, and I focused all my energy on being the best father I could be. Billy was thriving, though I could tell he missed having both parents under one roof. Angie and Ben continued to play a huge role in our lives, with Angie practically becoming a second mother to him. Ben, always the practical one, sat me down one evening after the divorce was finalized. "Will, you've been through hell. But you've got your son, your business, and your friends. Don't let this break you." I nodded, appreciating his words more than he knew. But it wasn't until Angie spoke up that I truly felt a sense of hope. "Billy needs you," she said softly. "And so do we. You're not alone in this." Years passed, and life slowly returned to something resembling normal. Billy grew up surrounded by love. Angie and Ben were always there, as were a few close friends who had supported me through the hardest moments. I focused on raising my son and building my business, finding joy in the simple things again. One day, as Billy's 10th birthday approached, I realized how much time had passed since the divorce. Sarah still saw Billy on holidays and birthdays, but our contact was minimal. She had remarried, but that relationship ended quickly after more infidelity. It seemed she couldn't escape her own cycle of self-destruction. I, on the other hand, had found a new kind of peace. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find Angie sitting on the porch swing, watching Billy play with his friends. She had been such a constant in our lives, and I suddenly realized how much I relied on her. As I sat down beside her, I blurted out the words that had been on my mind for months. "Marry me." She looked at me, surprised. "What?" "I'm serious," I said, my voice steady. "I've loved you for years, Angie. You love me too, even if you won't admit it. Let's stop dancing around it and make it official." Tears filled her eyes, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, with a shaky smile, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "I will." Billy ran over, sensing something had changed. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between us. Angie laughed through her tears. "I just got some good news, Billy. How do you feel about officially having me as your mom?" His face lit up. "You've always been my mom," he said simply. "Now it's just official." The wedding was small, just close friends and family, but it was perfect. We married in the spring, outdoors on the farm that had once belonged to Mr. Henderson. It felt like life had come full circle. The years flew by after that, filled with happiness and peace. Billy grew into a fine young man, and Angie and I built a life together that I never thought possible. She was the love I hadn't known I needed, the partner who stood by me through the darkest of times. As I sit here now, watching her play with our grandkids, I can't help but smile. Life didn't turn out the way I expected, but in the end, it turned out better than I could have ever imagined. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.